Hydro's been a staple element in the recent meta, not only through its power scaling, but also through its high flexibility in a multitude of team comps. In addition to the element itself, its individual units help augment the sheer waves that Hydro brings to the meta. But Mualani, our newest unit, is taking a much different approach to her gameplay, and a pretty niche one at that. In this video, I'm going to be covering Mualani's kit, and some of the aspects that make her stand out from her fellow Hydro users. I just want to remind you all that this is not a guide, it's a kit analysis. Furthermore, it's an analysis from a game design perspective, not a meta one. As always, my disclaimers, timestamps, social media links, and music credits are all down below in the description. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Yeah, I know, the joke's overused at this point. Let's start off by covering her main abilities. I'm going to assume for anyone watching this video that you already understand how her kit works, so I'll just cover the main stuff to keep it brief. Starting off with her skill, you enter a special state called the Night Soul Blessing, similarly to a Wanderer skill. The bar on the left indicates her Night Soul Blessing duration, in which the points you have will naturally decrease over time. The three fish icons indicate her stack count. When you collide with enemies, she gets a stack, and at 3, her damage can max out. Using a normal attack consumes all of her stacks, and deals a massive hit of HP scaling Hydro damage. When multiple enemies are nearby, you fire off missiles that cause the damage to be lower, but this does allow Mualani to have some semblance of AoE coverage. As an extension of her skill, her A1 lets her summon the special Pufferfish, allowing her to stay in that state a bit longer and deal a bit extra damage. Her burst is just an extra hit of HP scaling Hydro damage, and for the most part it's not necessary to worry about ER to burst all the time, but it follows the same idea of her skill where instead of frequent hits, it's just one massive nuke. Her A4 further buffs her burst by increasing the multiplier of her HP scaling. In order to do this, you need to have party members trigger what's called a Night Soul Burst. As a short summary, Natlan characters can trigger this effect at intervals simply by dealing elemental damage. The more Natlan characters you have, the shorter the cooldown between bursts. For Mualani, if she's the only Natlan unit in your party, she's probably only able to get one stack, which will only grant her the first bonus to her HP scaling. So now that I've covered her kit, we can now explore what makes her unique from other Hydro characters. As I mentioned before, Hydro is an element usually known for its flexible nature, with its users being able to enable many reactions through its quick application. The last time we had a niche Hydro unit was in 3.1, when Nilou released. Her kit primarily focused on buffing bloom cores and their corresponding attributes. Mualani is taking a similar approach, focusing her energy on a niche that also isn't fully tapped into, Vaporize. For those who don't know, Vaporize is a reaction that has two variants, reverse and forward. Reverse vaping is the act of applying pyro onto a Hydro aura. This version has a lower base multiplier of 1.5, but to balance it out, doing this version only partially removes the Hydro aura instead of the entire aura, which creates room for consistent application in quick-pace attacks. Conversely, Hydro on Pyro triggers forward Vaporize, which has a higher multiplier of 2, but this causes the Pyro aura to completely disappear after. Because Hydro units usually have fast Hydro application, the fastest Pyro appliers aren't able to maintain this aura, and this makes forward vaping incredibly difficult to set up. Mualani takes the identity that Hydro has with Vaporize and flips it completely on its head. She has very slow attacks, and by extension, very slow application. Rather than her being another Hydro enabler, she's the Hydro trigger. This is the kind of design that allows her to work in Vaporize, much better than any other option we have. Of course, in order to fully realize this potential, her slower attack and Hydro application is compensated by making each hit much stronger than your regular strikes. A point of comparison can be like Navia. You spend some extra time gathering crystallized shards for your skill, and when you actually launch that skill, the payoff is well deserved. With Mualani, you take extra time to apply Pyro and build up all 3 stacks, and then you launch the bite attack to Vaporize. With the right build and setup, 6-digit numbers aren't that far-fetched. So now that we understand how her niche works, let's cover what other aspects of her gameplay might cause you to pull or not pull for her. This list of pros and cons is a subjective list, but I want to mention these because numbers aren't everything when it comes to characters that you would want to pull for. One of the good things about her kit completely covering the Vaporize niche is that, objectively speaking, she is the best at it. Other Hydra units who can forward vape, such as Frina or Neuvillette, will likely have to rely on very fast Pyro application or burn vape teams to keep up with their own fast Hydro application. Mualani allows you to enjoy the reaction without having to worry too much about ICD rules. Of course, having a niche can, in some ways, be its own con. While she is the best at it, it's also the only niche that she really excels in. Part of Hydro's value is the quick application of the element, and it's what allows characters to be so versatile. But when it comes to Mualani, her slow application means she can't work amazingly in Hydro's other archetypes. Bloom, Freeze, Taser, etc. It's hard to picture scenarios where I would pick her over someone else. With that being said, it's not impossible to run her there. Even without Vaporize, her high base scalings make her damage output good on its own. But even still, her raw power might not be enough to be a solid pick. On that note, using her signature might further limit her, since it specifically relies on triggering Vaporizes to maintain the max amount of stacks. So you theoretically can't make good use of the weapon in a non-Vaporized team. If you are pulling for Mualani, just understand that she's a lot more like Nilou. She has a specific archetype that's tailored towards her, and any other teams you run will more likely than not be there for entertainment and meme content. Most of the stuff we've seen in early access footage has been focused on Vaporized teams, but I'm sure when she officially releases, the community will experiment with those unconventional teams and will get better insight on how good or bad she performs there. Another aspect you'll have to consider is her actual playstyle. Mualani's not going to be a standard DPS where you just spam left click and call it a day. A huge part of her playstyle is being able to collide with the enemies before using her attacks. If you want the best comparisons, just imagine how on-field Sayu and Kirara use their skills to move around and hit enemies. In some cases, the whole collision playstyle might not feel comfortable. Frankly speaking, I believe you shouldn't be pulling for Mualani if you don't think the playstyle is for you. Yes, her numbers are great, but if you don't enjoy how she operates, there's a good chance you'll bench her anyway. If you're a bit unsure whether you'd like her playstyle, and you also have Sayu or Kirara, I would recommend trying out one of them in a few combat scenarios. Just see if the movement mechanics are something you can get used to. These are just some of the main aspects to Mualani's playstyle that you'd have to contend with. Next, I want to talk about the archetypes she can best cover, and how her team options can also affect her pull value. As an older player, you might have more options to build around her niche role, but for newer players, you likely don't have a lot of characters. By extension, it also means you don't have a lot of characters who can properly synergize with Mualani, and the rough part is that her options are already somewhat limited as it is. For starters, you need to work around pyro application, but the main challenge here is off-field pyro application. As of right now, we only have 4 consistent off-fielders: Xiangling, Xinyan, Toma, and Dia. Xiangling can be self-sufficient, and she's a free unit you can get from a challenge, but she also has major energy problems, especially without a pyro battery. Then for the other 3 characters, you might have to supplement their slower application with another source, such as an animal unit who can throw pyro. Alternatively, you can run a burn vape team in which you use the burning reaction to consistently apply pyro and maintain an aura to vaporize. Doing this lets you get away with those slower pyro applicators. The other team aspect I want to look at is Hydro teammates. Because Mualani has HP scaling Hydro damage, she potentially benefits a lot more from running a double Hydro team for the resonance. The main problem is that her fellow Hydro teammates have faster application, which could hinder her ability to vaporize. Some of the best options might include Mona, Candice, or Farina, since they all have buffing that works with Mualani. But at the same time, I'm not entirely sure if the application will be slow enough. It kind of made me question whether she might have better synergies as an attack scaler. I'm not sure if I want to consider this as part of my analysis or just a fun thought experiment, but I do want to explore that what if. If Mualani was attack scaling instead of HP scaling, how would that positively or negatively affect her teams? I think for one, it actually does make thematic sense. With her being a vaporized DPS, which is a reaction centered around Hydro and Pyro, it wouldn't actually be that far-fetched to run a double Pyro team with her. If she's gonna run that anyway, the Pyro resonance would actually benefit her kit a lot more. On a more negative side, attack scaling means Bennett synergy. While it's not bad in and of itself, synergy with Bennett can also translate to reliance on Bennett. Practically all of her teams would include the guy due to his insane attack buff. I think that's part of why they made her scale with HP in the first place. Not only does it separate her from that almost necessary synergy, it also made us get a bit more creative with team building. On top of that, HP scaling generally has better damage ceilings compared to attack scalers. If you asked me if I would have preferred an attack scaling Mualani, I'd probably still say yes. It makes sense from a team building standpoint, makes sense in regards to her niche, and it also would have been a nice change to the Hydro roster. I know HP scaling is part of Hydro's niche, but the last attack user we had was Ayato back in 2.6. I still want the occasional Hydro user on that attack stat, and if anyone were to fit the bill, I think Mualani would have been a reasonable pick. Once again, however, both of these skillings have their pros and cons, and I still think she would have worked great either way. For the last main section, I'll just cover my ideas on ways Mualani might receive indirect buffs in the future. Despite what I said about her having somewhat limited options at the moment, I still think she's gonna have a lot of potential with future characters. For one, having more pyro characters with good off-field application can be a good way to expand her team options. That way, Xiangling doesn't have to be the only major option on her list. I've been anticipating Mavwika to be that Xiangling or Bennett power creep, which an earlier concept video of mine actually reflects. If you haven't already, you should totally check it out. But moving on, I think another way we can give Mualani a buff is through a Hydro teammate that can somehow synergize with her. The very big detail is that this character also needs to have very little Hydro application. That way she can provide the Hydro Resonance and other various benefits without disrupting Mualani's Vaporize triggers. On that note, any sort of buffer that won't disrupt the Vaporizes will also be good options. I didn't talk about her much in the team building section, but Kachina with a 4-piece Cinder City set is actually a decent example of this. She can give Mualani a 40% Hydro damage bonus by triggering Crystallize, and Crystallize generally doesn't mess with reactions as much, which is another reason why she might slot in pretty well. More of that kind of buffer will be a nice addition to Mualani teams. In summary, I think Mualani's kit is very well designed for the niche that she covers. Her team options do seem kind of limited right now, but I'm very hopeful we'll get more synergies with the Pyro Archon and other future characters. But for now, we'll just have to get creative with the team building. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribing to support the channel. For my set of questions to get you thinking, what are your thoughts on Mualani's kit? Are you planning to pull for her or not, and for what reason? What teammates or team comps do you think she'll shine best in? If given the choice, do you prefer Mualani to be attack scaling or HP scaling? And finally, any additional thoughts you might have. I'm curious to know what you think. Thanks again for watching everyone, and I will see you all next time. Bye!